Hello, and welcome to my final presentation of my 340 project, Star Chaser. Star Chaser is a space 2D mobile shooter game that I made using Flame Engine and Dart. It's designed almost like an homage to the classic game Galaga, in the sense that I tried replicating the art style and, to some extent, even the spawn patterns. Some of the key features that essentially are the building blocks of this game are a collision detection system, a scoring system, an automatic shooting system, the input validation that is suited for joysticks, and it's a little more flexible than a traditionally fixed joystick, since you can touch on different parts of the screen and it'll just move to where you touch. And by far, the biggest block that I had the most trouble with was the enemy wave spawn patterns. And I'll be going into more detail on that later. But let's get into the art assets. The assets that were used for the enemy sprites, the bullet, and the player were all manually made by me. Now, I didn't exactly come up with them out of thin air. I obviously used reference images, and recreating pixel art is relatively simple since it's blocks and it's not something incredibly complex. So I was able to do that with ease. The custom splash screen, background, and icon for this game, all three of them were made using DALL-E, which is ChatGPT's generative art tool, I guess you could call it too. So that's how I got the custom splash screen, background, and the icon. The sound effects that were used for the shooting of the player and the explosion of the enemies, and basically the losing life sound, or I guess the hurt sound that you could call it, for the players when he loses a life, they were all taken from free sources, royalty free sources on the internet. And the fonts that were used is mainly just one custom font, which is the Minecraft font. Again, I was going for a pixelated theme, so the Minecraft font really was a very simple solution in that regard. Now I will demo the game once by playing through it for one life. I have played in this version of the game before, so there are scores that are already saved, which will also be loading up. And I'm loading the app up after closing it, so this will make sure that the save data is being loaded. Anyways, let's get into the demonstration. As you can see right here, I've paused the screen because the splash screen is there for a very short amount of time. It's if you blink, you'll miss it. So I've actually freeze framed this right here. This is the splash screen. It does display, but if you're not specifically paying attention, you might just miss it. And we have a simple home screen. The game loop page starts from this button right here. And we have a documentation page as well that navigates to the web page for the documentation. And as soon as you click this button, the game just starts instantly. Now, as soon as you get into the game loop, the objective kind of becomes clear, since you're shooting from the get-go. It's like there's no control for shooting. You constantly shoot. I feel like it was better to take an automatic shooting approach, because lately I have also been playing a game called Vampire Hunter, and it's essentially the same thing, except it's based on a ground versus vampire combat. But they also have the same thing where they just have attack going on loop by itself, and the player is just responsible for positioning themselves the correct way. So I took inspiration from that, and I made the attacks automatic, one less thing for the player to worry about. And let's see, the enemies have 4 wave patterns that they can use to spawn in. And as for how I divided up the code into different Dart files, most of the game's core code which is essentially the entry point, and the game loop in and of itself is done in the main Dart file. So that's the main Dart file has the code for the player's movement, the bullets, drawing the background, the game over screen, the menu. It essentially manages the entire state of the application. And where I did find it necessary to divide different classes and make them separate from the game was the spawn patterns, because they were proving very difficult to achieve in the way that I had originally sketched out. And you can find the sketches of the spawn patterns that I had at the start in the documentation. I just made like something on Paint, but yes, essentially everything is done in 4 Dart files, and 3 of them. Oh wait, sorry. Everything is done 4 Dart files. There's 4 patterns. There's 4 different files for each pattern, and then there's the main file. That's how the code is divided up. And let's get into the enemy spawn patterns. So for designing the spawn patterns as well as the enemy movement after they've finished spawning, what I had in mind was similar to Galaga, that they come in rows, enemies of the same kind from different places, and they all travel a certain path and then reach the top of the screen. From then onwards, once they're in a certain part of the top of the screen, they all have the exact same pattern where they start moving a little bit to the side and then down and then back to the side and then down and then back to the other side. So that's how the enemy patterns are meant to be programmed in. I have 4 patterns. One of like the reason for 4 patterns as well is similar to Galaga. The game is easy in its current state right now because it's very easy to kill players, but there's not too many threats for against the player. The enemies aren't too powerful, let's say. And if the player was just sitting at one point and just AFK, if I hadn't have multiple spawn patterns, especially the one that comes from behind the player, the enemies that come from the bottom and then converge up like towards the middle, if I didn't have that, then the player could essentially just AFK and infinitely just keep winning the game, because like there's no reason there's no reason why they can't. So as the game is supposed to be an infinite loop, the enemies that come in each consequential wave, they keep incrementing. So technically there will reach a point where there's just too many enemies on the screen, but to reach that point you would have to probably play the game for a good 10 minutes or maybe more on one single session without losing 3 lives. So that's how I sort of made a difficulty curve for the player. The common features across each of these pattern Dart files is that they all handle the speed customizations for each of the enemies. They have different sprites. They essentially, each spawn pattern is not only like a spawn pattern file, but it's also the entire behavior for one entire class of enemies. So to finish off with, I would like to say that if I hadn't spent such an absurd amount of time on making these complex enemy spawn patterns and made just something simpler there, I would have probably spent more time on developing possible power-up features for this game, like a shield, or add like a temporary double shooter to the player so that they can shoot, or maybe like two ships like they used to have in Galaga. So that was one of the avenues, and one of the future avenues that I can still improve this in is having there be an option after the wave to sort of pause the game loop and then ask the player for a choice of upgrade, whether that be an upgrade in health, whether that be an upgrade in movement speed, an upgrade in the amount of projectiles you shoot, the power of the projectiles. Things like that are, I feel, a great way to grow this game and give a better sense of progress, because the player does not actually get stronger in the current version of the game. So providing that sense of progress. Again, this inspiration is also taken a little bit from Vampire Hunter. I've been playing that game a lot recently. It's very, very good for an indie game. But that's what avenues I would improve. I would also add a little more complex movement for enemies after that they've spawned to further differentiate each enemy from the other, because right now they kind of, after they've finished their first 10-20 seconds of movement, they basically all move the exact same. And I would also add some boss levels where essentially a bigger, higher health enemy that also shoots back at you and you would have to dodge. So that could be a few avenues of improvement for this game. But anyways, thank you so much for watching my demonstration, and have a good day.